Welcome back to the Lords of Lore podcast. I am Matt,
I'm Luka.
And I am Will.
and this is the podcast for all things fantasy and sci-fi nerdom. Big main topic today. We're doing sentient, non-humanoid creatures. Bit of a mouthful, but you'll get it. But we're also introducing some new segments to the show, which we're very excited to do. Yeah, and keep posted as we have some new shows rolling out as well. So lots of new programming coming. And without further ado, let's just get into our newest segment. Drum roll, please. The Luka's Litany of Literature. So take it away, my friend.
So for this new segment, I'm going to be just talking about whatever I want to talk about from what I've been reading recently.
The podcast within the podcast.
My 10 minutes to talk about what I want to talk about for a bit. And I've been reading Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Will is gone, but that's okay. I just finished book 4 of 10 of the main series.
Oh my goodness.
And first of all, just to say, it is fantastic. Anybody who loves fantasy and is a huge fantasy nerd should absolutely read it. But I want to talk about something that bothers me about audiobooks. Since this has happened in this series, which I'm really surprised about. Have you ever had a book or series where the narrator changes partway through the series?
I've never experienced that. I think I would be devastated.
Yeah, so the first 3 books are narrated by Ralph Lister.
Okay.
Who was fantastic. The next 7 books are narrated by a new narrator whose name I just forgot. I apologize.
Okay.
The guy. And it's nothing against the second guy, but they don't carry over pronunciations of names. And
that's huge.
It's very jarring. Like,
yeah,
a very specific example. So the entire first 3 books, there is a type of being that can essentially change its form from human to another type of form, and they're called soul taken in the whole first 3 books. From the 4th, the narrator pronounces it soul taken, as if it's like not the word taken, but it's all one. And like, now I don't know if the author meant it that way, and I'm just so surprised that like the author or the directors of these audiobooks would allow this non-continuity to happen. Like,
soul took.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it was just very jarring hearing it for the first time. And another thing that threw me off was the fact that this new narrator has so much of a deeper voice, and he's changed like the accents of certain characters, and it just, I don't want to say that I don't like it, because the new narrator is really good.
Right.
But now that I've been used to the first guy for the 3 books, like, it's going to take a while to like readjust.
Right. And the characters almost feel different because their voices are different now, right?
Like, they do. Like, there's a specific character named Quick Ben who had like in the first 3 books like a very sort of like a light sort of tone. Like, he was very laid back and a sort of higher pitched male voice. And then the new narrator, he has like a deeper accent and almost like a sort of like almost like a piratey sort of like an enunciation to some of the words he says. And it just like threw me off completely, because this like Quick Ben wasn't in book 4 for the most part.
Okay.
He only comes in at the end. So like I had this first 3 books to like get to know this character through one narrator, and then like this reveal of the same character in the 4th book, and it's like, whoa, like that's not the same guy.
Oh man. Like, I don't know how. I'm actually listening to the God of War audiobook right now, and hearing it's the guy who, I can't remember his name, but Alistair something, I think. The guy who voices Mimir in the game, he does the whole book.
Okay. And
it's fine because the way he's describing it, it's like Mimir telling his story. So it's a pretty cool like meta thing. But when he does Kratos' voice, it's like, it's not Kratos.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just not the same. And it really feels like someone telling the story opposed to like being in there with the characters type of thing.
This has just been messing with me because I just finished book 4 and he's like narrated book 4. And like, even though I finished the entire book, like I still haven't been able to get over it. And now I'm starting book 5 with the same narrator again.
Right.
So it's like, that's fine. But I've just been thinking about it a lot for the past few days, listening to book 4.
Okay, so here's a question for you. If the author came out and said, like, not in a disparaging way, but said, the guy who I got to narrate books for from, he's doing it the correct way. The pronunciations are correct. We didn't have that type of time with the first 3. This is how I want it. This is how the characters sound to me. Would that make it better for you, or would you still feel
I mean,
like,
I could live with that. You know, I don't think like for me, it wouldn't make much of a difference. Like, I feel like when somebody's reading the book, they pronounce it however they want, and like
Yeah.
a character sounds however they want, and that's sort of like the liberty of the reader. Whereas like when you're in an audiobook, you're sort of like forced into this pronunciation and perspective.
Yes, yeah.
Which is sort of like the one of my least favorite part of audiobooks. Like I listen to a book that would probably take me like 2 weeks to read in like 4 days.
Yeah.
With an audiobook, but I have to like listen to him say soul taken instead of soul taken the whole time. And I'm like I want to see how it's spelled.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the thing for me with audiobooks is like the pronunciations I love, especially like talk about like Rage of Dragons and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like all that is just so juicy goodness. But when I see those words, I'm like, huh,
Yeah.
it's not how I would have approached it.
Yep.
But
oh, and speaking of Malazan, the author of Malazan, or one of the creators, Stephen Erickson, who's Canadian, by the way.
ooh, shout out.
Yep. He pronounces Malazan as Malazan.
Oh no.
Like I heard it in an interview, and he pronounced it Malazan every time, and I was like, wow, like I don't like that.
I've only ever heard it as Malazan.
Yeah. Like I much prefer how
he made it.
Exactly. Like, he created it. So it's like obviously he's right, but
Yeah.
so that's just been on my mind for the past few days listening to book 4. And I just want to say as a last and final note on my little rant. Malazan Book of the Fallen through 4 books has become maybe my favorite fantasy series of all time.
Wow, that's
Like-
high praise.
Like if I were to say now, would I rather read Lord of the Rings or Malazan? I would honestly lean towards rereading Malazan, just in terms of like epicness and scale, and like it's like almost my ideal fantasy story.
Wow. Wow, so this must be like an earth-shaking thing for you, this narrative change. Like
It was very jarring, yeah.
yeah, wow. Yeah, I don't know how I'd feel because there's audiobooks that I've bought and I didn't like the narrator, so I just stopped listening to them.
Yeah.
And there's books that I bought solely because a narrator from a previous one I had listened to was narrating this one. And I was like, I love this guy. Like Stephen Brandt, so good. And I was like, well, I'll listen to the dulcet tones of Stephen Brandt in this other fantasy universe. Why not? And you know, it's a great series too. Yeah, I don't know. Will, any thoughts?
I'll be honest, I've never listened to an audiobook.
Ooh.
At least the fiction one.
Okay. Any specific reason? Like
I don't know. I just think I don't know. I think it's just because I've never done it. I've actually only listened to like one audiobook, and that was because it was like my like final year of my undergrad, and I had to write like a book review, and I didn't read the book, so then I found an audiobook of the book, but it was like super dry. It was like, yeah. So it was
I think it's tough with fantasy ones too. Like you can run into that dryness when someone's like, this is my job, I read audiobooks, but they don't care, and you can hear it. Like there's like, oh, he swung the sword. Like it almost feels like they're making it, oh, this is silly. I'm not gonna, act my ass off here because blah blah blah. But I feel like you can really tell when someone's like, cool, like this is awesome. I get to be all these characters.
Yeah. Also, like I do have a really bad habit of like buying books and then never just getting around to reading them.
Yep.
So there's that too. Like actually yesterday I bought like 5, which I probably won't touch for like another 2 years. So yeah.
No, but they make you look interesting to your house guests.
Oh, for sure. I have like an entire shelf, but I've only read like one of them.
Yeah, for me, it's not as cool because I have just a whole ton of Star Wars books, so I don't look like a learned dad when people come over.
A learned enter the deep lore.
Yeah. Okay, well, speaking about Canadian creators, I'm going to transition us very smoothly into our second segment of the show called Matt's Monster Musings. Yeah, chew on that. And we go back to the original Canadian creators, the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And we're going to talk about the Wendigo, or Wendigo. Pronunciations vary, spellings vary, myth varies, visual depictions vary. But the traditional story, or as far back as we can actually pull from, this is a wraith-like monster, very thin, gray skin stretched over its like rib cage and musculature. Um, and yeah, again, this myth comes from the Native American people, specifically the Algonquin people. And the Wendigo, also now more so depicted with like this skull of it's usually like a goat or like a deer with its horns. And it represents famine. So I think this is maybe something you wouldn't know basing off the visual of the Wendigo, but it was meant to sort of represent like winter, the coming of winter, starvation, and also greed. So there's a story. What is this guy's name again? Onway, the killer. So basically, there was this village where people were going missing. So they got this guy to come who was like this renowned sort of hero with supernatural abilities. And he came and he sort of sussed out the village and began watching this family like super closely. Did you know this story, Will?
No, I've never heard like the Algonquin one. I mean, the stories vary and stuff, I guess,
Yeah.
right? But I do have some stuff to add to it afterwards.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
But anyway, so this guy comes and he begins watching this family, and he sees like this family, like they just go about their business like any other family in the village, but something seems a little bit off about them. And he gets a closer look, and the stuff that they're eating doesn't seem right. So he pegs them to be the cannibals in the village. And they've turned into Wendigo. Their greed has turned them into this creature. And it sort of goes back to like over hunting and overconsumption, things that sort of are heightened when the European settlers came. And so the Wendigo-ism got turned into a thing. Like there's an actual condition called Wendigo psychosis that's been debunked thoroughly since. But I'll get into that in a sec. Anyways, this guy comes and basically he confronts the family. Some of them actually transform into like the Wendigo beast, and others are just cannibals. And he basically doesn't give any of them mercy, even the youngest, because he says, you never gave mercy to the people who you killed. And he's sort of like setting balance back to the world. The interesting thing, though, is when he kills them, you have to burn them or else they'll come back, or their bodies will like tarnish the land. But you burn them, their hearts don't burn. You have to keep adding wood to the fire, and eventually their hearts will disintegrate. But if you just put them in a fire, they're like ice cold. Again, sort of playing into that metaphor of the people who have sort of like lost their humanity. But I think it's a really interesting monster because it's more so, again, like a metaphor of desperation and starvation, what people will do to survive, how people can like forsake the community and put themselves first. Obviously, cannibalism being a pretty gruesome example of that concept. But yeah, Will, go ahead. What do you have to add?
Okay, so two things. One is fun. One might be kind of boring. But the first one is highly recommend. There's this one indie game that you can get on PlayStation 4, Windows, Xbox, the Switch. It's called Kona.
Okay.
I think it's made by a developer out of it's either BC or Montreal, but it's set like in northern Quebec, like during the 50s.
Oh, is this the one you were telling me about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
like it's kind of like this. It's kind of like a detective game. Like there's not really action or anything like that. And like normally that's not something I would go for. To be honest, I just saw the name, and like my friend actually has a dog named Kona, so I was like, oh, and it was like on sale for like $2, so I just like got it.
Yeah.
But I had no idea, did zero background into it or anything like that, and it just sat on my dashboard for like 2 months, and then I played it over during the Christmas break, and then for the holiday season, and then like totally blown away, and like it does like a really good. It's almost like a period piece. Like it's like an example of like storytelling through video games as an alternative medium. Definitely really good. And it's not very long either. It's only
It's
like
more like those like telltale type of games. Like
kind of, but like you have a lot more, like your character has more agency. So
okay,
like it's not like you're like set like on a track of rails, like being
Right.
pushed forward. Like you can like totally miss like the majority of the story, and then just like the ending hits you and it's like, whoa, what the hell? Or you could like be like me and cave and just look on Wikipedia to find everything. So there's that. The second one actually is there's a really good a graphic novel. Again, it's fairly short. It's called Micmosis and the Wendigo, which is kind of like an alternative, I guess, like interpretation story, but it's not an actual like traditional one. It's these two legal scholars one's from the University of Victoria and one out in the University of Alberta. These two legal scholars, named Val Napoleon and Hadley Friedland. So they came up with this book where they use like this teaching to introduce like a form of like alternative justice. So like in their interpretation that they use, like they give like this background story on a few pages where it's kind of like discusses the situation where this person, like what you said, Matt, where they kind of were stuck in this like famine, desperation, super cold out, nothing to eat, so then they like cannibalize someone.
yeah.
So then it walks them through, and then like that ends, and then it kind of like has like this like, I don't want to say corny, but it's kind of cheesy, but like this group of like all these people, like how would we approach this with like as a form of like alternative justice? So then they kind of like walk through and like it does a really good job of like talking about like how you can use alternative justice in like extremely complex situations like
Right.
homicide.
Yeah.
Which is always like the big tough one, because I mean you can talk about restorative justice, but then when you get to the big bad ones, it's kind of a difficult one. But yeah, highly recommend it.
Interesting that you mentioned in like late 19th, early 20th century, there were like a handful of indigenous men who were actually arrested and convicted for murder, for killing other people because they claimed they were Wendigo. And in the culture at the time, it wasn't a crime. I don't know if it would be called that, but you were sort of able to kill someone who was a Wendigo because obviously that person would harm the village. So sort of like dealing with the problem. But obviously at this time there's a lot of problematic things going on.
Yeah.
And so these men were actually convicted without realizing there was laws against this type of thing. And obviously, like if we look back in hindsight, we might be like, yeah, obviously that's an issue, but it's really sort of more complicated than that. And it's unfortunate, obviously, but
actually that's what the book is based on, is one of the gentlemen, because basically like it kind of walks through, because again, like this group of people had like zero contact with incoming settlers and stuff like that, so they were just doing what they were doing, and then they basically, I think like in like the real world history case, like I think just one of them heard about it because they were like, oh yeah, did you hear about that like Wendigo down the road kind of thing, and how they dealt with it? And then so they get pulled up on, and then one of the gentlemen was charged with like homicide, and then I believe he was actually given the death sentence.
Oh.
Yeah, actually it was Battleford. North Battleford, I believe. That's where
Yeah,
Chip
yeah, yeah.
is. Yeah, and then so like the whole point of this book is basically like how can we use alternative justice to like free this person? They go back in time and like
Yeah.
it's kind of cheesy, but like it's a really good example of using it as a way to kind of talk about those kinds of things. Highly recommend it. It's also fairly cheap too. I think you get like a paper copy for like $10.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I want to touch just while I still have a little bit of time here on D&D uses of the Wendigo, how I would use it. Like, obviously, when you talk about like its origins, it feels disrespectful in a way to play it up as like a villain for your tabletop game. But at the same time, like with tabletop games and especially like stuff like D&D, we are dealing with myths, and I think bringing the light out of some things like this can be at least entertaining, if not constructive. So if I were to use it, um, it would be sort of like in a village that's famished and people have started to disappear. So like the party coming in would be like the Onway character trying to figure out, and there would be like a family, that was doing suspicious things. You could roll some investigation checks, you know. But then the twist is there's actually like this demonic thing that's like influencing the minds of the people more so than them just being cannibals, because that's another horror type of thing. But yeah, I think the most interesting thing for me about the Wendigo is that um, there is in the myth sort of it being this demonic creature that someone turns into, and also it could just be seen as just people who sort of lose it a little bit dealing with the harsh climate of Canada in the winter. It's not unheard of for that sort of thing to happen when you're put in sort of that desperate situation. Any thoughts from you, Luka?
I think it's just interesting talking about like the origin of something like the Wendigo, where you see it in so much like pop culture, like the very first Supernatural episode. I don't know if you guys, I think I've like the very first episode is like a Wendigo.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's interesting to see how they stripped down all the like deeper layers of it, turning into just like sort of a pure cannibalistic monster,
Right.
which is sort of like happens with like a lot of non-Western myths, where they like take sort of like the surface level idea of a monster or myth and just like make it a caricature
Yeah.
instead of exploring the deeper,
Right.
reasoning behind where it came from. So it's cool
Yeah.
that I actually didn't know like all that about.
Oh, I wanted to bring up too, like I was talking about Wendigo psychosis. So this was like a thing where the Europeans that came over started, like they were told of this myth from the indigenous people, and then they started to like use it against them. So if an indigenous group didn't want to hand over their land to the settlers again, they would say, oh, they have Wendigo psychosis, they're being selfish, they're not sharing their land. And so it was sort of something that got turned against the, which is like super sad, and really fucked up when you think about the origins of the myth. Like a community that's like desperately trying to keep what's theirs so that they can sustain themselves, and you go around and call them selfish. Like obviously, I think it led to some incarcerations, and if I'm not mistaken, I think some executions as well, which is just really sad. But yeah, this segment has been brought to you by Land Back and the indigenous people of Canada.
Also,
so with that,
as
sorry,
a
go ahead.
side note, yeah. Also, like I tried looking it up, but I couldn't find it. But I'm like 95% certain that Wolverine's like first comic book appearance, like back in like the 60s, was fighting the villain Wendigo.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
That's so cool.
I remember like seeing it somewhere because I had like this like book on like Wolverine, but like I couldn't find it online. I just did a quick search, but
yeah, it showed up in like Hannibal as well. There's a movie called The Wendigo, which a lot of people attribute in film at least to inspiring that look with the horns and the like deer skull.
yeah.
But yeah, Yeah, so I think that'll do it for the Wendigos. This has been Matt's Monster Musings. And with that, we're going to transition into our next segment here. Our third segment, Will's Wondrous Wisdom. So what are you bringing today, Will?
So we're going to get into the topic of historical uses of just non-human characters, which is super wide, but I did find some characters I actually wanted to focus on. Sorry, I'm just checking my script. We're trying to be more structured.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah,
This guy wrote a script.
So I mean, like non-human characters are often used, which we'll get into a little bit later, to I guess kind of like perform like a certain function of the like the literary objective, I guess, if you will, or like the overall narrative. But like
Right.
like the way I read it is like a lot of times they're just used as like a literary mechanism almost like a trope kind of thing, or like a framing and stuff like that for when you're discussing. So I mean, for non-human characters in the historical context, the first thing that comes to my mind is I mean, like the serpent from the Old Testament. I mean, that's a pretty big one.
Pretty classic example, yeah.
Yeah, there's not that much thought into it.
No, you know what's funny is it fucking, like, when we were preparing for this episode, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, yeah, that was one of the things that I looked into. But I mean, like in that instance, because like I guess like depending on which books you read and interpretations, but like generally, like the character of the serpent is often used not so much as like a character, but almost like kind of to give a fork tongued in the road. Yeah. Yeah.
Very good.
So like in that instance, we see like this, like this character like nudging the story forward almost through through I guess introducing like temptation and stuff like that to some of the characters that are in the Old Testament as well. As a side note, he also the character of the serpent being, I guess, like this malevolent creature or entity, I guess, is also pops up in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was Mesopotamian, like fairly like there's a fairly large gap in between some of like the Old Testament stuff and the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's actually like a really, really good read if you could find a really good translation on it. Yeah, almost like depressing, but also kind of very like cool how it was written. But yeah, in this character we see a serpent again, like tempting like one of the characters and just kind of being a dick. But I'm not sure because like obviously I don't know like cuneiform or in like ancient Mesopotamian. So like there's also like this you also have to take into account like maybe the person who translated that just attributed it to being a serpent. So
Okay.
but like regardless, it's a non-human entity, I guess. That just rolls up to basically ruin everything. Yeah. And then actually it's funny that you talked about the Wendigo because like my thoughts was also for historical was like the character of like Coyote that
Right.
also shows up in numerous like indigenous backgrounds. It's a fairly popular character with a lot of groups, especially in Canada and like a lot of like I guess like Plains nations throughout North America. But like in that instance, not as malevolent, but could still be a little bit of a dink. But like his role as well is to be like a trickster to kind of not so much like move the story along, but like in this instance, like it's almost like he's used in or the character of Coyote is used in these stories to kind of like teach people a lesson.
Right.
Yeah. So that's kind of like what I came up with for historical stuff. So it's kind of funny how like these characters are used similarly to how they are like in today's world.
Yeah,
Like there's
absolutely.
hasn't been that much advancement since the Mesopotamian age.
Well, we added comic relief to the umbrella.
Yeah, we turned them into cartoons and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Yeah, so with that, I think or sorry,
I don't know. Any questions, folks?
actually, yeah, speak a little bit more about Coyote, because it's sort of, from what I know, and I'm definitely probably wrong on this, but it's sort of not based on or related to, but comparable, I guess, to like a Loki type of character, like a mischievous sort of like otherworldly being,
Yeah.
who sort of has their way with mortals just as like shits and gigs, basically.
Mhm.
But less like nefarious, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely close to Loki, I guess. Like a lot of characters. So like, especially like in like Western Canada, it's usually like Coyote's usually a man, like who either like is kind of named Coyote or he kind of like turns into one. Like almost like a shapeshifter kind of thing, but far less malevolent. In fact, like I don't want to say like anti-hero, but he's like in some depictions he could just be like this like lazy dude who just like tricks people into like giving him food or something like that. And then he finds himself in a situation where like he has to like save the day, but he has like zero interest in doing it because he's very lazy. But yeah, so like he's sometimes used as like a almost like a cultural hero. But definitely like kind of like in that, I don't want to say like pantheon because again like groups vary and stuff, but that's kind of
Right.
how he is. But yeah, very similar to Loki, maybe not as like as big of a dick as Loki was.
Right. Yeah.
In a lot of his backgrounds and myths and stuff, but yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so let's hop right into our main topic. Luka, if you want to break that down for us a little bit.
So we are going to be discussing non-humanoid sentient characters that come in as main characters, animal companions, just random side characters in our favorite media, fantasy or otherwise.
And for this topic, how are you defining humanoid?
I suppose, upright, standing on two legs, arms, legs, anything resembling, like elves are not non.
Oh yeah.
Like, yeah. So
What about orcs?
I mean, they're humanoid. Humanoid. Anything
Goblins?
that has. Yeah, absolutely.
Trolls?
Yes.
Snarks?
I don't know what a snark
You
is.
just go down the whole list.
Grumpkins? Every ogroid creature.
Oh man. So like, okay. So like for the audience, Klaus the fish from American Dad counts,
Yes.
but Brian wouldn't, right?
Correct.
Okay. That's how I went into it. Like, so like notable one I didn't think about was like tree ants or ants. Because I was like, they have two legs.
Yeah.
They're like, especially like the M wives and stuff. But anyways, so let's get into some like notable or like our favorites, I guess, representations. Go ahead, Will.
So like I got a couple.
Yeah. Go with your most favorites or
okay. How
ones you
about I
think are
just like
most
fire off a
recognizable.
couple, then I get into some of them.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So like number one, it's funny that you mentioned ants because I was thinking like the King of the Eagles, Throndir.
Hey, come again. Hit us with that one again.
No. We're moving on. Next one. The next one is Saphira from Aragon, like the Inheritance. I don't know, I almost said trilogy, but like books.
Yo, let me stop you right there. I had no idea that kid was like 17 or 15 when he wrote those books.
15.
Insane.
I can't believe people ever like shit on those books or that movie. That's so disrespectful.
I mean,
he's a
movie is
goddamn
another
child.
story.
What's
that?
that?
Was not his fault. He was not involved in the movie.
Oh,
so.
sure. But like,
But
even
the
still,
books,
like, you know how cool it'd be if you're like 20, you're like watching the movie of your book. Like,
Yeah.
Yo, I made it. Like, that's so sick. Anyway, sorry, go on. Will.
Yeah. Fantastic books. I actually want to reread them. Yeah, I don't know. I love them. Um,
And that character from that is the dragon.
yeah, like
Okay.
the main character's dragon companion.
Okay.
Actually, I liked her in the movie. I thought they did a good job. I watched the movie not too long ago. It is kind of, yeah, I don't know.
When I saw it as a kid, I
Ah,
thought it was just a good fantasy movie. I didn't know
yeah.
better. I haven't seen it since, so
But
I
like
have fond memories.
when you like watch it and compare it to other fantasy based films, it's kind of like, oh man, like it's, there's so much they could have did with this.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, poor Chris. Uh, they did him dirty.
Didn't do my man's Chris dirty.
Yeah. The next two is actually a pair. So I have Darkstalker Kath and then Kingseeker Frampt from the Dark Souls series.
Oh, okay. Not
Yeah.
familiar.
So like there's like these two serpents. So like one kind of like hangs upside down and one stands up. And again, like there's kind of like that parallel where they're like tempting a character into like basically choosing these two routes, like either keep the cycle of the world going or just like end the cycle and start anew.
Okay.
Yeah, I really like them. They're more prominent in the first Dark Souls game, but really good. And then yeah, Donkey from Shrek.
Classic. Hey, and you had mentioned like before we started recording, like almost every other character in Shrek fits into this category, really.
Yeah.
Maybe we'd cut like
The
I
Shrek
guess
episode.
yeah, a lot of them are bipedal, so maybe not, but yeah, it's hilarious. Good call.
Yeah.
We'll move over to you, Luca. What are some of your faves?
I picked, actually, I wanted to talk about the one character that made me think of this as like a topic when I mentioned it to you guys. Also from Malazan.
Well, it's actually Malazan. So.
Yeah. Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this character shows up in like maybe like one paragraph of book 3, Memories of Ice.
Okay.
And this character is named Gumble. And Gumble is a toad.
Cool.
Who accompanies Ormu Logan, who is the imperial artist of the Malazan Empire.
Okay.
And he is so he's encountered while he's painting a scene of the Malazan Empire exiting the city that they just finished conquering and crossing the river. And Gumble is this artist frog companion. And Gumble, this is a quote that Gumble says describing himself. When she says to Ormu Logan, "Dear man, I am a toad, while you are an artist, and for my fortune in that distinction, I daily thank every god that is and every god that ever was."
Wow. Deep.
He is also the imperial artist's critic and his main reflection of his art.
I love that.
And
it's so good.
Gumble the Frog describes himself as a humble observer speaking on behalf of the ignorant and inarticulate masses.
Yeah, it's so good. Oh man, what a role. Like okay, just one sec, real brief. One of my friends was a breakdancer. This might sound way out there, but one of my friends was a breakdancer, and him and his buddy would always be doing this choreography, and they'd be doing these moves that, like, within breakdancing circles, were like super, like you'd get respect. I was like, man, if you're doing a show and I'm watching, that's not impressive to me. I like when you did the flippy thing, the spin, like that was sick. but it's like that's like an important person to have as someone who's like, yeah, I don't get it, but it didn't look cool, so do the other thing.
Exactly.
I'd love to be a frog just critiquing art as like a pleb.
No, I just love that person, like the idea of like, and he also mentions how like most artists essentially like fall on the sword of public criticism and like go crazy trying to please the masses, and like he is just like the observer that essentially gives the opinion of the masses that they can't articulate. I was just dying laughing listening to this guy. He only has like 3 lines, but like I loved him so much and I can't wait to see him again.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of that song, Joy to the World. Jeremiah was a bullfrog. It's just like ever since I heard this song, I was like, I want to see this frog. Like, how does he drink wine? But and he can speak a language we don't understand. Anyways, do you have another one, Luka?
I do. I've mentioned an example. I've actually mentioned this character before, and it is Nightblood, the sword from Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson.
Okay.
So Nightblood is a sentient blade.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I just love Nightblood's personality so much, like as like a companion. So I've also have a quote from him, just like sort of to get a sense of his personality or its personality. He says, "I'm not bloodthirsty. I just want to be useful," which is like, if you like read Warbreaker and see his personality, like or its personality, it just fits so perfectly because its command as it was awoken was destroy evil. That's it.
Okay.
So its goal is to destroy evil, but it has no concept of what is evil, what's good. It just knows that it needs to destroy evil. It also is extremely self-centered, but like not in like a evil way. It's eager to help. It always wants to help, but it only knows how to destroy.
Yeah.
So it's like always trying to convince the person that's holding it to like draw the blade and essentially destroy the evil around it, which is just anything that's around it. So it's like always trying to convince people to draw it and to use it.
Yeah.
And then whenever it's like sheathed and ignored, it gets really upset and irritated.
I love like there exists like some weapons like this in D&D. I think it's like so funny, like because most of the ones in D&D are evil and just want to kill things, doesn't matter what. And then the other ones are like good and just want to kill evil.
Yeah.
This one just being like, yeah. But like, man, imagine if you're like suddenly you're a sword. You're like, wow, I would just like to be useful. But
Yeah.
all I have is a sword. Like, what are you supposed to do besides kill evil?
I just love the idea of like giving this thing a personality, and like the reason I keep calling it a him is because the first wielder gives it male pronouns.
Okay.
This sword does show up in other works of Brandon Sanderson, and other characters give it other pronouns, and then it like slowly learns about gender, and it's like extremely curious about it because it doesn't understand the concept. Like,
cool.
Doesn't understand man versus woman. Like it's just a sword.
It's a sword, man. It's want to be useful.
Oh.
That's awesome. I love that.
Do I have anything else for the sword? Yes. Nope. That is it.
Rare ASMR tone.
I only wanted to I wanted to say that like oftentimes like Will was saying, these characters end up being like exposition or like just narrative devices rather than actually having personalities.
Right.
And there's just like such a strong example of not a personified sword, but like trying to give a sword sentience and trying to think of like what would an inanimate object think,
right? Yeah,
when it has consciousness all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's not like putting a person into a sword and being like, what would that? It's like, whoa, what if a sword had thoughts?
Exactly. Like it just such good writing.
Awesome.
Like Brandon Sanderson is the best. And just a few other random examples if you guys have heard. I mean, actually, I have the Eagles from Lord of the Rings. Appa from
Ooh, would you say Appa's sentient though?
I mean, Appa has
because there's definitely that one dream sequence thing where like that was cool, but I don't know if that's
but he also he like responds to characters and stuff sometimes though.
Right.
I feel like the understanding of like feelings and emotions is enough to sort of qualify as like having that level of intelligence in like a fantasy setting. It doesn't have to like be able to speak specifically.
Okay.
There's a few, anime has like a bunch of them.
Yeah,
you guys have
definitely.
seen Fairy Tail. There's Happy the cat. Or,
okay. So the guy who does Fairy Tail also does Rave Master, right? So there's, do you know, is Plu in Fairy Tail as well? Like he's like a snowman that crawls on. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like a side character in Fairy Tail.
Okay.
But I think Happy is also in. Oh no, it's like another manga that this author is writing about, like a space manga or something, and it's like Happy's character design is there too. He's like the
Oh,
blue
cool.
cat with wings.
Yeah, right.
And Tony Chopper from One Piece, a classic.
I've never seen One Piece.
He's like he's a reindeer that ate one of the like magical fruits in the One Piece world and gained essentially the abilities of a human. So
Oh,
yeah, to
yeah.
walk
Wait, I
upright.
think you've talked about this before, but that's awesome.
Yeah, I love Tony Chopper, and he becomes a doctor, which is classic.
Okay, so I have a lot, but I'll start with probably my most favorite, and I think one that we haven't touched on, R2D2. Being like a droid, he's not a humanoid.
Yeah.
But definitely sentient, and probably the most important character in Star Wars. Like, has the most inputs on what's happened in this story so far.
He saved the rebellion
Multiple times. He saves Padme's ship heading to Tatooine in episode 1. Just so many examples of him interfering. So there's like these out there fan theories, and I think I'm going to lose a few people here, but that he has the journal of the wills inside him. Like, and so he's acting to restore balance to the galaxy. That's his programming. It's also cool, like in the Clone Wars animated series, there's like an episode where you learn his memory has never been wiped, which is really strange for an R2 unit. Usually you wipe them after every mission, especially in a war, because if they have plans that don't get executed, then those plans might fall into the enemy's hands. So he gets captured at one point, and it's like a big deal because they find out Anakin's never wiped his memory, and so there's all this like sensitive information that could be released. But even after that, he still doesn't get his memory wiped, which makes it really awkward when he doesn't tell people things, because he can communicate and people do understand him. But he was never like, "Hey, I know your dad," like, you know. But and C-3PO, I wouldn't put on this list, but just funny to mention, his memory does get wiped. So there's things this guy just knows but wouldn't be able to speak on, and R2 doesn't remind him. It's just hilarious. So it speaks to like a higher knowledge that he has, that he's just like, yeah, you don't need to remember that. That's traumatic. Like yours, there's a character, I can't remember their name now, but there's this really great, it's like a novella, maybe. It's like a short book by Anthony Ryan called The Pilgrimage of Swords. And similar thing with like a talking sword. But this one has like a less than great relationship with its wielder. And this one's more so in that vein of person being put into a sword and now having to deal with that. So that's really interesting. And then I chose Moro from Princess Mononoke, which is like the great white wolf of the forest. Just a really cool character. And Luka, you would know, in my previous D&D campaign, I took that format and mapped it onto every god in my world. They were all just giant animals with like wings or like horns or some shit. And it was really cool. Yeah, and then a few honorable mentions. There's this thing called Morph, if you guys have ever seen Treasure Planet. It's like this floating blob of purple. And it can like shapeshift into things and like mock people. It's pretty cool. And Calcifer from Howl's Moving Castle. It was just another one I had down. BMO, Jake the Dog, Scooby-Doo, SpongeBob. Maybe SpongeBob doesn't count because he's got legs. Yeah. Okay, so maybe this might be a little bit different. So how do you guys feel about animals that gain sentience opposed to like having been born with it as characters? Like any examples that speak out to you? The one I could think of is like this bear animal companion from Critical Role, which is a D&D show. And it doesn't really gain sentience, but one of the characters gains the ability to speak with animals, and so they've been traveling with this bear for like years, and they finally gain the ability to speak to it. And he's just like, "Oh, hello, it's very nice to be your friend," type of thing. It's awesome. And then when they learn that it can like respond to them, it's like super sad when he gets like hurt and like, but yeah, it's pretty cool. But yeah, any gained sentient creatures you can think of?
There's like a bunch in like Chinese fantasy, like I think it's called wuxia, where like they have like interesting power systems in those stories where like humans and creatures level, like literally like go up levels and ranks, and then at a certain point it's like a pretty much widely applicable trope where if any animal reaches a certain spiritual level, it'll awaken its like spiritual awareness and be able to like gain sentience and even like turn into a human form.
Right.
And like it even awakens like ancestral memories and stuff like that. So like that's like a pretty common trope that I've seen in like Eastern Asian fantasy.
That's so traumatic. Holy.
I mean,
imagine
like,
you're a cow and you just like, ancestral memories. Just holy.
That's like the example. I mean, animes too. Like
for sure, yeah.
Like even Chopper is an example of that. He like eats the fruit by accident as like just a normal reindeer, and then gains sentience and starts walking upright. Like, and then if a human had eaten that same fruit, nothing would have happened because they would gain the power of being a human.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
I love that. There's also that librarian from the Avatar.
The owl.
Yeah, Wan Shi Tong. That guy's an asshole, but he's really cool. But yeah, like sort of like he's an owl, so he's sort of like symbolism for like wisdom, knowledge. And then for him to like have a library and be like super stern about it is just hilarious. Are there any examples, or unless Will, you have some gain sentience ones you want to talk about?
I can't think of any. I've spent the last few minutes like looking for one. I don't know everything. Like off the top of my head, I can only think of like examples of animals like having sentience, like from the get-go. Right. So I can't think of like anyone's like gaining it. That'd be terrifying. Imagine like all of a sudden you know how to know, but then like
how to know. Yeah, it would. And what is the one? I think it's like the Monkey King, right, Luka? Where it was just a monkey, and by some, I can't remember what it was. It might have been like a fruit thing as well, where he gained sentience and still lived among monkeys, and then eventually was like, "Man, y'all a bunch of idiots. Like I can't sit here flinging shit with y'all. Like I'm gonna go talk with the humans, like learn how to read and shit."
I don't know if that's how it goes in like the original story, but that's definitely what happened in my D&D campaign.
Yeah. Oh yeah, dude, that's totally what I'm thinking about. That didn't happen in real life. Yeah. I'm like remembering the flashbacks you were narrating for us. Yeah. Sorry to anyone I may have offended with that. It happened for me. It's real to me, damn it. Okay, let's move into maybe some examples you don't like so much. We'll start with you, Will.
I mean, the ones that I don't like, I guess just in general, are often like, I don't know how to say it without catching flack. But I would
do it, man.
You guys are gonna think I'm like a monster. Like I don't know. So like whenever like I watch or like read, generally it's usually more serious stuff. I don't know why. It's just I don't know. Like when I watch a movie, like I actually like enjoy like watching like the heavy stuff. Like I don't know. And same thing when I read. Like I like to. I think my preferences might be a little bit more dry sometimes. So like generally like I guess like sentient non-human characters that I don't like are usually like
You're in too deep. You got to do it.
Yeah, I know. And it's just like I have to take the plunge, but like I'm not like a Disney guy.
Oh shit! Oh, you hear this guy? Hey, this guy doesn't like Disney.
So like I don't know, just like
In the comments,
like
this guy always
cartoon
sucks.
like animals and stuff like that, and like I don't know, just like Lion King. I've been watching like
Look at
once.
his face. Look at his face when he said Lion King. Lion King. No, but no, go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know, but again, it's just like personal preference. So like I would like to hear like I don't know, like I'd be more interested to hear like what like Hedwig has to say as opposed to like what like Timon and Pumbaa have to say.
Oh, Will, what a
man.
hot take. What
Yeah.
an absolute scorcher of a take. I didn't know
God,
you were
God
going
in
there.
4K.
Yeah. Oh man.
Like
I
got me.
disagree.
Yeah, understandable.
But I can sort of see because there are good sort of side characters at Disney. Even some of the ones you mentioned.
You know what?
I
You know
think.
what? It's like the big guys. I just like hate them. It's like how I
You
hate
Pumbaa. This guy hates Pumbaa.
They had nothing but war for Puma, but no, I guess it's just like I don't know. Well, now if I say it, I'm gonna sound like a little bit of a snob, but like kind of like it's just like I don't know. I hate like dumb characters that are unnecessarily dumb.
Yeah, no. That's fair. I like we had talked about that in our episode about tropes, right? Like,
Yeah,
don't
like
make this guy the butt of the joke just to do it. Like that's his role here, kind of
yeah.
thing. But I think Timon and Pumbaa are good characters.
Yeah.
Strongly
That was a
agree,
bad
yeah.
example because they
Bug
do
eating
talk a lot more,
Pumbaa.
right?
But I think like what's
Yeah,
the
I'm
name?
just-
Mushu from like Mulan, I think is like maybe like a tad bit offensive and like I mean like everyone loves Eddie Murphy, who also a tad bit offensive every now and then.
Everyone, Donald Duck, and
Yeah. So like
I'm
I
just digging
can
myself a
definitely
hole right now.
I can feel what you're saying, but like yeah, there's
I'm
definitely some
sweating right
examples
now.
within Disney movies. I'm trying to save you here. I think
No,
there's like
just move on, man.
okay.
Cut me.
That's how you feel, man. Yeah. Luca, how do you feel about Will's awful? No, I'm just kidding. How do you feel? What are some, if you have any bad
Play this
examples of
guy.
this type of character?
I don't know if I have like a specific bad example. I don't feel as strongly as Will. I feel like
Just hating on children's media.
Oh
I
my
think there's some
god.
leeway there for the children's content with like Timon and Pumbaa of like
Yeah.
dumbness for characters. But what I don't like is like, for example, dragons in anime. For some reason, like it's usually like the shonen type animes where there's like a
Mhm.
dragon character in like these fantasy animes. I find them like the role they play is just so cringy a lot of the time. Like this like wise dragon character is just like it's such like an overdone cliche and it's done the same way again and again and again where like every fantasy world has to have like the big red dragon or like the big black dragon or like this is the big evil dragon who turns out to be good or whatever. Like
Yeah.
it's just overdone. That
Which
like
is
as
funny
a
because I was gonna bring that up as one of my ones that I like. Like I can't remember his name, but the dragon from Bone. Have you guys ever read that series?
Yeah,
It's like a graphic novel series.
I haven't
I've
heard
heard
that
of it,
name
yeah,
in
I've
like
never read it.
forever.
That's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Bone.
But yeah, it's just like this dragon, and then you later find out, spoiler warning for Bone, there's a bunch of dragons, and he's just one of the many. But I definitely agree. Like it sort of falls into that trope area of like old wise dragon who's he can
Well,
be bought with
yeah.
gold
Or even like the like I
bargained
find
with.
in a lot of like the newer fantasy animes, it's like it's always like in the animes like oh character gets transported into the fantasy world and like gets some OP skill, and then like the first thing you see is the giant evil dragon, and he like kills it immediately, and it's like that's the start of the story. It's like okay, like let's just. Oh, and another thing with anime dragons, it always bothered me how they're always like flying, but their wings are never flapping, and like it just, I know it doesn't matter, but like the fact that they can stay in one spot, like only hummingbirds can do that, where they can stay in one spot floating with
guys. Only hummingbirds.
Like the only creature that can do that is a hummingbird. It's always in these anime.
Or like a bee.
Yeah, what about a bumblebee?
Well, no, but they can't stay stationary in one spot. They have to be moving to stay in the air. Like only a hummingbird can float in place in the air. It's the only creature that can do it. Everything else has to be in motion to stay in the air.
See, okay, so I think like there's also just a difference between like Western dragons and like Chinese, Japanese dragons. Where like Chinese dragons are usually depicted without having wings. They're more like serpentine, I guess.
Yeah.
So that one doesn't really bug me because for that one, my headcanon is it's magic, so it's just flying.
Yeah, like, I know. It's not. It doesn't matter. It's just like I don't like it. Like the dragon's like wings are out and it's just like not moving. It's like how is it? Like, what?
See, I sort of like the deviation that Mushu is in that. Oh, I'm a dragon, but he's like this big and he's like pretty useless. So I think that's a cool one because I think it is often like, oh, the big scary dragon. For me, as a dungeon master, I think dragons have to be given like the utmost respect because it's in the game title, but also they're usually like the strongest enemies you can face. So like your player characters shouldn't be able to kill a dragon until they're very powerful or a very young dragon. And then that brings with it its whole, troubles because if you kill someone's child dragon or whatever. But yeah,
that just
I don't
adds
know.
to it, right? Because like when it's like that's exactly the thing. It's like a dragon just becomes like this, like, oh, it's like another dragon. Oh, we killed a dragon. Like it loses its like, it's not scary anymore. It's not like this mythological or like respected creature or something. Just like, oh yeah, I slayed the dragon with my skill. Anyway, that's like the anime. But since I mentioned these Chinese and like Eastern Asian fantasies, a lot of the time characters are put in there that are like animal companions that serve like a very singular purpose, and they're essentially just a servant to the character, which I really don't like because they're like they have no motivation, they have no development, they have no personality, they just serve as like a weapon for the character, and I don't like that as like a reason.
I think I know what you're talking about, but like, do you have an example?
I have an example from a story like that is like a wuxia fantasy series, like an online fantasy series called Sovereign of the Three Realms.
Oh, wow.
And in that series, it's like essentially like a reincarnation story, where the main character was essentially like at the peak of this world's like magical system and then died from a calamity and got reincarnated. And then essentially he runs into a species called the gold biter rats. And like it's like at the brink of death, he manages to strike a deal with their leader to like essentially serve him, and he'll like give them benefits and help them evolve and like raise their spiritual awareness and power, like I was talking about. And then like from that moment, their development and motivations are done. It just like he carries them around in this like magical little hive that's like a spatial sort of magical thing, where it's like inside is like a huge space, right? And like he just brings them out when he needs them to eat something and like puts them back. It's like and this is supposed to be like one of his companions, and there's like so many of these examples in these types of stories, and I just don't like it as like a narrative device.
It sort of reminds me of like Inuyasha. Like there's a whole bevy of like small characters that just show up when it's convenient.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we obviously touched on it a little bit, but what is like the defining thing that you think makes this type of character either like good or not so good?
Well, again, like having its own personality, motivations, development, like reason for being in the story, aside from like, oh, this is going to be like the fox that turns into the character's love interest or something, like,
A classic. Yeah.
I mean, that also does happen quite a bit in this Eastern fantasy, but it's like that's why I think Nightblood is such a good example, because it's like a unique take on this. Like, instead of putting a person's personality into a thing, like giving like no animal would think like a person if they like
Right.
like awoke or had sentience. So I think just having a purpose as a character rather than as a device or like a weapon is like the key that goes from like good to bad
Right.
in terms of execution.
Okay, so Will, what do you
Um,
think, like, as a whole, like, this type of character can bring to like a story?
I think like what you said earlier, like subverting like the whole expectations with that little dragon dude from Mulan.
Yeah,
I
you
don't know,
hate that
haven't
guy
seen
too, huh?
it. Yeah. Kick that guy. Kick him in the ribs, his little dragon ribs. Stomp him out.
Oh my God, stop.
It's like the horse for Mulan.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like, yeah, instead of having like this wise old creature, kind of like noble creature that's in a very hard place to find kind of thing that gives you sage advice, I kind of like that. Having like this, like subverting the expectation, having like this creature that would often get stereotyped, even though he kind of is a stereotype, but like have him like kind of do like these like comedic relief, and also is like kind of tiny, as like, whereas like usually dragons are almost always depicted as like these giant creatures. So I think that's like kind of cool, but wouldn't know, haven't seen Milan, so but I do know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So like, I guess subverting expectations, that's one use or a way to use this type of character. What are some others that sort of come out at you? Luka, maybe.
I just think like the different perspective, like the frog having like the like representing something, like I don't know what's a good way to say it, like
Personification of the people.
yeah, I mean, like
I don't know.
like I think it brings to the story like just again, if the creature, if this like non-humanoid thing is just another person, it sort of takes away from the fantastical element of that.
Right. Yeah.
True.
Like I think like giving it, like having it act as like a different lens for the reader to see things through, or like just like a different perspective on any situation, like where like you have this like super dramatic situation and like human characters are thinking of like, oh, like what could we lose, what could we gain, and then the sword is just like, just pull me out and destroy things, like who cares what's going
Yeah.
on, like
And sometimes they're right. Yeah, I definitely think like perspective is huge. Like, what would this talking fox think about it? I'm hungry. Like, there's nothing. That's a good point. Yeah. I lost my train of thought there for a second, thinking about how a fox would be hungry.
How do we define sentience
Yes.
in an animal?
Define.
Character. We're not talking real world. So.
Oh, what do you mean?
Like I don't know. I was just kind of pulling off the top of my head, but I was thinking about like how we were talking about like how traumatic it would be to like for like a cow to suddenly gain sentience, and then like
Yeah.
like I don't know. Like I guess like yeah. I don't know.
I'm
reaching here. I'm just
yeah, no,
stop
it's
now.
okay.
The Disney take, and now this.
No, Will, it's fine. Let's maybe make some up. That might be fun real quick here. But I had just like from you saying that about the cow. What if there was like, I'm thinking of like a predator animal, like top of the food chain, like a panther, let's say, who gains sentience, is all of a sudden like, how do I live with myself? Like after eating all these things, killing all these other creatures, like that just turns into like a straight up vegan,
But like
just like a
would
pacifist.
it know? How would it know like what is moral killing and what is not?
Yeah, well, if it gains sentience, it could probably be like, if I'm alive, then that thing must be alive. Is it right if I kill something that's not sentient?
I don't know.
I don't
Is
think
it?
so. But you know, like,
Yeah, we're getting off track.
Would the morality of like a predator be if it gains sentience?
yeah, like it's got to survive still. You know, now it's aware, or would it just become like super like bummed out? Like,
But would morality not be imposed upon by a community,
well, no,
civilization,
let's just say like it's like sort of
society?
like the example from One Piece where it just eats a fruit that gives it like human sentience, I guess.
Fair enough.
Just like gets super depressed. Just like, what's the point?
The depressed predator.
Yeah. It's like, oh, it's sort of like if it was like a big beast or something, right? Like an owl bear, right? It just becomes
Ooh.
like sentient, and then the adventurers come and they're like, we will defeat you, and he's like, you might as well. You know? I also had this idea of like a druid like going to a forest and just like starting to awaken trees and then leaving, and then like 100 years goes by and there's now just like this thriving culture of like tree ants who are just like, you know, they don't know about the outside world. They just like, oh, the creator gave us life. And you know, it's just like some crusty old dude. Like,
That's actually such a good idea for a campaign setting.
yeah. You just
Which
go to this forest. It's like, oh, are you the creator? It's just a dude with a beard. Like,
I think that would take us into our next topic. Or did we already broach that?
I think we broached it, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, like how, like what does this topic bring to fantasy?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I
You're
had
the
to
one
like.
with the script, bro.
It was like the only one where we didn't announce. But
Yeah. I tried to slide into it. It was smooth.
fair enough. Yeah. Well, I guess like bringing like how do like animal sentient animal characters, non-human characters, bring is definitely, I guess, like what we talked about, like exposition.
Mhm.
Definitely like my favorite is like, I guess, like nudging the story along, which is what we talked about, and now I'm rounding the bases. But
Okay, wait. So I want to. I
Yeah.
hate to harp on the Disney thing, but is it just the context of a Disney movie being like lighthearted and targeted towards kids that makes you not like those characters, or is it because their purpose is usually like singular?
Like a little bit of both, but I think a lot of it's just because like I'm superior to children.
Oh my fucking god, dude! I was born this way. I was born a 26-year-old man.
I'm kidding.
I just like 5 years old. Mom puts on Beauty and the Beast. He's like, huh. Best picture winner? I think not.
Peasants.
It wasn't deserved? I think not.
No.
Equal singing
Yeah,
in the theater.
I don't know. I think honestly, it's just because I was like deprived of Disney as a child.
Oh, this got sad.
So-
Sorry, man.
well, like not like that. It's just I don't know. Just like my parents never like I don't know had like Disney stuff. So then
Something sat you down in front of Phantom of the Opera and Godfather Part 2.
actually Phantom Menace. Yeah, but,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So I don't know. It's just like when I like watch that, like I've like hung out with people that are like, we'll throw it on nostalgia. And I'm just like, I've never seen
okay.
this. So
Yeah. So it's more like it's silly to you because there's no nostalgia with it.
I guess, yeah. I don't know. It's just kind of like I said. I don't know if I guess I'm boring. I don't like lighthearted. Not really selling myself right now, but
Yeah, you're like an awakened panther, man. You just, what's the point of Disney movies?
yeah.
Okay, so let's go into our final thoughts here about these characters. If anybody has any, go ahead.
Final thoughts about any of these characters we've mentioned?
Yeah, or just the topic in general.
I think they're absolutely necessary in fantasy. I think
Bold
fantasy
statement.
would be at a loss without.
Okay, now you two have to fight.
No, I was agreeing.
yeah, I know. And
Yeah.
Will?
I think they serve a very important purpose in fantasy.
Yeah. I don't think you could have fantasy without non-human entities that are sentient. Preferably not a Disney character, but
Yeah,
are Disney movies even fantasy? There's some of them. Depends.
I would say most of them. I
Damn.
mean, the animals talk. That's
Yeah.
pretty fantastic. Yeah, no, I agree. With I think they're essential. I don't know, like I just kind of feel sad. Like I don't want you to hate Disney movies, but like I think it's the same thing though. In that in those movies, like we get to sort of like, for instance, like Olaf the Snowman, right? Like that's a character everyone loves because they are singular.
I haven't
and that
seen
is
it.
just happy as fuck. He's just a snowman who has life now. I can't remember why, but he's alive. And it's great. And you know, he deals with the the concept of mortality, that he's like, when summer comes, well, fuck it doesn't matter. I'll still be a happy snowman. Like we'll make it work. Like I don't know. It's like it's a comic relief, but it's also like, well, we can all sort of root for this character who isn't plagued by like the human condition.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you guys that I think they're essential. And I don't know if there's too many poor uses. Like obviously there's the ones that feel, you know, contrived or like well, this was for exposition purposes. But yeah, I don't know if I hate anyone.
Actually, like another example I just thought of is that like glowing ball of light fairy thing from Zelda. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot
See,
of
like
the Zelda companions, yeah.
Yeah. Like I like that. Like I like it like when they're like done like that. Maybe not so much as like having non-human characters as main characters, I guess, is more of my thing.
So you find every Disney character annoying, but you're fine with Navi. Hey, listen. Hey, Link, your take fucking sucks. No, I agree though that the Zelda characters are actually really dope versions of that. One's the soul of a sword.
Yeah, I like that. I like it when they're not like as
or the talking hat.
Yeah,
the talking boat. You know.
Yeah, the will-o-wisp.
Yeah,
I like that. I think if you could add that to fantasy, I think those would like kind of provide like maybe not the backbone, but the rib of the fantasy.
The ribs of the small dragon creature.
Yeah. That are broken by will.
Yeah.
They traumatizes children.
Oh my god. It's like those dark YouTube videos. Anyways. Okay, so I think that'll do it for our conversation on non-humanoid sentient creatures. Yeah, I guess our release schedule is a little bit up in the air right now. Not entirely sure what next week's episode will bring. We were supposed to discuss that beforehand, but we forgot. And so it'll be a surprise for everyone. But yeah, keep a lookout for announcements. You can follow us at Lords of Lore on Instagram as well as YouTube. And obviously you can find our podcast on all streaming services that do podcast things. So yeah, I'm Matt.
I'm Luka.
And we are the Lords of Lore. Every time. And we'll see you guys next week.